will record the session and such that we can broadcast it again afterwards. So yes, I see that the Takis started the recording. Very good. All right, so welcome everybody to our second seminar from the Effects, the Horizon Europe project Effects. It's a pleasure to have all of you here on our seminar. This is indeed so the second one. 2 weeks ago, we had a first online seminar in which we present a few insights from our research and in which we're going to discuss with you and as well with policymakers on how can we deliver this effect message as broad and as good as possible. The Horizon Europe, so the workshop of today, after a short welcome in which I will introduce you a little bit to the effect program, we will have 4 papers. In the first paper, I'm going to take you a little bit about how to measure efficiency and what are the efficiency enhancing effects of additional resources. Next, we do have a paper from the Italian team. It's the paper by Gaetano, Tommaso Agassisti, and Lucia. I'm just going to mute participants who are speaking, so very good. And then we'll going to have a presentation by Keir Peuter. She's from our sister project. So this Horizon project has 2 sister projects, and the project that Keir is part of is a sister project where it's going to look at inclusive education and in the context of uncontrolled school choice. And then finally, Anna-Rita is going to present us about efficiency in universities, in European universities, which is also a paper from the EFFECT projects. And afterwards, after the 4 papers, we do have a discussion by Nuria Diaz-Gardia from the European Commission, from DG EAC. She's going to take us a little bit about what can we learn now from a policy perspective and what kind of future research, future lines can we see from that. Obviously, we're curious to see your opinions, to have your questions. So after each paper presentation, there will be a few minutes as well for questions. So if you have questions in the meantime, please let us know. And then after each paper, we will come back to that. Just to take you with us on the EFFECT project. So the EFFECT project, it's actually a Horizon Europe project which looks at efficiency and effectiveness of education. So we know that there are quite a bit of resources spent on education, quite a bit of resources which are often not spent in the most efficient and the most effective way. And within the Horizon Europe project, we're looking with a couple of partners on how can we improve the efficiency of education, how can we measure it? That's a few questions that we'll deal with today. But also, how can we improve the effectiveness? How can we measure causal impacts of interventions in education, such that in the end, we provide policy recommendations on how to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of education. And we'll try to also look at cost effectiveness. And so in the projects, we basically have 4 general objectives. First of it is to strengthen quality education. How can we improve the quality of education, but also how can we measure the cost effectiveness? So very often we saw that there's quite a bit of research on effectiveness, there's quite a bit of research on efficiency of education, but often we don't know the exact league tables. So what is more cost effective than other projects? And so in the projects, we're often trying to measure the costs of tools, and trying to provide those league tables such that we can say something about the costs, about the effectiveness, and about the efficiency of education provision. Second, we're trying to enhance the knowledge about policies that are effective. So we see in a lot of literature that there's quite a bit of research focusing on the United States, focusing on admin data in the States, focusing on survey data in the States, but often we lack the kind of rigorous analysis in European Union member states. And within the Horizon Europe projects, within the EFFECT projects, we're going to set up quite a bit of randomized control trials, trying to look at difference and differences techniques, regression discontinuity designs, such that we can say something about causal implications and causal evidence on specific interventions. Third objective aligns with that, because we're looking also at equal opportunities. So how can we improve the opportunities of education? How can we make sure that education and quality education is feasible and possible for everybody, irrespective of the background, irrespective of the school you attend? And so equal opportunities in education are definitely part of the EFFECT goals that we have. And finally, as I said, But trying to look at cost-benefit assessments, trying to see what are the benefits on the short run, the longer run, and how can we provide this kind of league tables and insights to policymakers. The Effect project just started, so we started in January of this year. So by the end of the year, we will be 1 year in the project. It's a project of 4 years, but nevertheless, if you have a look at our websites, so www.effectsproject.eu, you will see that we made quite a bit of progress already. You will find a little bit of insights from the project on the website. You will find a bit of information about the objectives, about the expected impact that we have, about partners, about the people in the team. But also, and that's definitely might be interesting for you, you'll find some information about the research papers and the workshops. And so far, the project's delivered about 6 publications in which you look at different angles of the project already. So we look at the data use, for instance. How can we foster data use? How can we foster the determinants? What are the determinants of effective data use in higher education, for instance? We look also at parental involvement. What is, for instance, the relationship between parenthood and health? We look at higher education, whether you can provide incentives and information to people in higher education, and whether this changes the study outcomes. We look at, as the paper of today, at the signals of efficiency in European universities. So what can we learn from that, and what are triggers and changes that we can do as a policymaker? There's also a book chapter in which we look at impact analysis of education and policy reforms. And finally, there's a bit of evidence on the COVID-19 crisis and the pandemic on what works there and what doesn't work. So these are a few publications. There are quite a bit of publications in the pipeline, so have a look at our website, stay in touch on the website, but also try to have a look at our policy briefs, because of course we know and we realize that similar publications, they are often very specific. They have specific methodologies that are often quite advanced, which is necessary for scientific publications. But to reach a broader audience, we created a policy brief series in which you will find short summaries of the papers. And so in 4 or 5 pages, you will find a non-technical explanation about the papers and about the main bullet points, the main elements, the main policy implications of our research. And if you don't like policy briefs, if you don't like reading, we also try to convince you in our podcast series. So on our website, you will find a podcast series, but if you would prefer to listen it on Spotify while running, while sitting on the train, while driving your car, you can listen to our podcast, which are actually quite vivid way of presenting the policy briefs, and in which you will find out more about the project, but also about the main implications on the importance of the topics that we study, etc. So at the moment, we do have 7 of those podcast series. So there are a few in the pipeline as well. So keep an eye on the project and keep an eye on our Spotify accounts. Another way to stay tuned with the project is to come to similar events. So the workshop of today is an example where you can find more information, but there are a few events already in the past where we discussed both with academics and policymakers, for instance, on financial literacy education, on experiments that we did in financial literacy. So there were people from, for instance, the European Commission present, people from different universities. There was also a workshop on efficiency in education in Milan, workshops in Leuven. So stay tuned on that, because it's always a very vivid and active environment in which we try to connect with all of you basically during our conferences and workshops. And just a last advertisement before we really get started is our social media. That's actually the best way to stay in touch with us. So connect to our X accounts, connect to the LinkedIn accounts, in which you will find all of the advertisements, but also a few insights on the projects, maybe a few things that might help you in practice, in your policy, in your work, on what we find in the Effect project. But also, often we're open, or we're always open to feedback and collaborations. So if you see potential in one of the papers and in one of the research lines, please connect to us either by email or on all social media. Voilà, that's our project in a nutshell. I guess that while you start listening to the podcast series tonight, you will be inspired by our research but also hopefully by the agenda of today. So without further delay, we're going to discuss the first paper, which I'm going to discuss myself on the efficiency enhancing effects of additional resources. We do think about 15 minutes per paper, and then a few minutes of feedback such that we can move on to the next few papers in the next coming hour. All right. All right, so that's our first paper. It's a joint work with Oleg Badunenko, Deni Mazrikai, Subal Kumbhakar, and myself, in which we look at how can we interpret if you have a change in a policy. What is the interaction between the policy change on the one hand side, the causal impact of a policy, and the efficiency? Because very often we think that a policy might have a direct effect and an indirect effect, and it's this indirect effect, the efficiency change, that we're going to discuss in this paper. But just to give you an idea about what is an efficiency and what is an effectiveness, I'm going to introduce you to the education production function, because the education production function is a way that we as economists think about the organization of education. And so there is quite a bit of inputs in education, inputs such as the family background and the socioeconomic environment a student is growing up, the endowments like IQ, but also the learning capacities, etc. That's family inputs. That's the way that someone is growing up. But there are, of course, also school inputs such as the funding of a system, such as the size of a class, such as the quality of a teacher, such as the ICT environment, such as the infrastructure of a school, etc. So all of those things, they come in as school inputs. And then you do have also the innate ability, the real IQ of a student that is not influenced by those family or school inputs. And all of those inputs together, they create the student outcomes. And that's a little bit the way that we as economists typically look at how inputs produce school outcomes, how inputs create impact in terms of test scores of kids. If you plot the educational production function, you typically find similar graphs. So you find, for instance, on the horizontal axis, you find the annual spending per pupil and purchasing power parities, for instance, here in this case. On the vertical axis, then you have the PISA test scores, for instance, here the average 2018 PISA test scores on math, for instance, on the vertical axis, and then you can see the different countries or the different regions, and you can see how countries are doing. And overall, we observe, as we observe in the effect project in general, that more spending is not necessarily resulting in better outcomes. So you need a specific amount of spending, baseline funding, and overall, the more spending you have, there is not a real causal impact of even more spending to education outcomes. It matters more how you use it and what you do with that rather than the spending as such. And that's, of course, where we define inefficiencies. Inefficiencies, you can look at them in different ways, but overall, there are countries, for instance, here like Estonia. I give this example because of Carey, who's our third presenter, but Estonia is clearly a best practice because there are no countries that are doing better in terms of less input spent and more outcomes obtained. So that's why it's a best practice frontier, best practice. Turkey, for instance, well, they spend a little bit of amount of money on education, but given what they spend, they do relatively well with this little amount of money spent. On the other hand, there are countries that are clearly inefficient, such as, for instance, France. France is spending quite a bit of money on education, but for the same amount of money spent on education, there are clearly countries such as Estonia that, with less inputs, with less money, are doing much better. And that's kind of output inefficiency. If they would produce outcomes in education as good as Estonia, for instance, they would provide quite a bit of additional resources, quite a bit of additional test scores as they do now. Or for the same amount of outputs, they could reduce the inputs, they could reduce the funding significantly if they would produce as efficient as other countries. And that's how we distinguish between the money spent as well as the inefficiency of the system. What we find here at country level, at system level, we can find the same outcomes here at individual level. And individual level, we call it underachievement. Underachievement is also the difference between what a student could achieve and what the potential achievement if it would produce as good as the best practice observation, and what is it actually underachieving, actually achieving. And that's what we call the underachievement, is the gap between what the student is producing, the test scores of the student, and the potential of the student. And so for instance, here in this graph as well, there are clearly students who are doing significantly better, and that's with a given IQ, for instance, are having more and higher test scores than other students. And the gap here is what we call underachievement. There is also in our paper a little bit of measurement error, a kind of symmetric part. I'll come to this in a minute. That is simply because of noise, because of bad luck, because of changes in the environment, creating a little bit of differences across people. So that's why there are some students, for instance, clearly doing better than what they could expect. So there are overperformance, and other students are underperformance. That's how we see inefficiencies both at system level as well as the individual level. And in this paper, we basically go on with that approach. So we look at the inefficiency. We're decomposing this traditional way of looking at test scores, so traditional regressions, and we decompose the error term of the traditional regressions into various bits. One bit is the measurement error, which is like a normal symmetric distributed deviation, just random noise basically. So the student breaks in the morning a leg. If you break your leg in the morning, your test score will be a bit lower than you would be normally. Or if, for instance, the parents are divorcing in a specific period, so the student is affected by that. So that's basically the random noise. And there is also an asymmetric bit, which is really the underachieving part. The student is not performing as it would if he or she would perform as the best practice function. That's how we decompose it in the paper. We decompose it in such a way that we can correct for environments. We also have a panel version, so we observe the same student over time. And because we observe the same student over time, we can account for quite a bit of things. We can account for time invariant underachievement. We can account for random noise at the school level, etc. So there is quite a bit of things that we can control for in the analysis. Second thing is that, as I showed you in the earlier slides, the advantage is that we start from a theoretical framework. We start from the education production function, in which we do have those inputs, which are quite well defined in the literature. We do have outputs, which are quite well defined in the literature, and then we connect both elements. But we distinguish between those drivers of what we call underachievement, and we can see what drives now the underachievement, or the reasons why students are underachieving. And finally, what we do in the paper as well is we connect this efficiency framework with this causal inference framework. So we look at causal inference, we exploit an exogenous change in a policy. Exogenous is important because there is no self-selection, there is no omitted variables, there is no reverse causality, so you can really interpret it as causal, but at the same time we connect it to this efficiency framework, and that's quite innovative in this literature. I come to this in a minute again. All right, so what do we do exactly, or how do we approach it exactly? We start from a policy change in Belgium, in the Flemish regions in Belgium, in which students or schools actually, they get additional funding if they pass a specific number of disadvantaged students. And in that case here, schools, they receive additional funding if they have more than 25% of disadvantaged students. And so we know exactly who's disadvantaged. It depends on the family background, it depends on the degree of the mother, it depends on the neighborhood, it depends on a scholarship that they receive. And if they do have a combination of those elements, we define them from a policy, we define them as disadvantaged. And if you have sufficient disadvantaged students, more than 25%, then certainly the school is eligible for additional funding. And that's, of course, quite interesting because you can compare both students at one hand side of the cutoff and at the other side of the cutoff. And in expectation, if nothing was there, if there was no policy, the schools at the right-hand side of the policy, so the eligible students, and the non-eligible students at the left-hand side of the policy, they would be equal in expectation, they would have the same outcomes. And that's what we call a regressionist continuity design, so we can exploit both elements. We test in the paper, of course, the bandwidth, so the more students you include, the more observations you have, the higher the power of the analysis, but at the same time, the more heterogeneous the groups are. We test whether there's manipulation at one side. We test here whether it's a sharp or a fuzzy RDD. A lot of things that we do additionally in the paper, but the main message is we compare at both sides of the discontinuity. And as such, this gives us a kind of causal interpretation of the policy change. Second thing that we do in the analysis is we apply not the traditional regression discontinuity design, but we apply a stochastic frontier analysis. And stochastic frontier analysis is a way to measure efficiency. It's a parametric way to measure efficiency in which we decompose the error term, the traditional error term of regression, into various bits. And one of those bits is then the traditional random noise. Another part of this is time varying inefficiency. Another part of this is persistent inefficiency, and then there is also this what we call underachievement of the students, and that's the part that is interesting for us. That's the part if the students would behave as good as the best practice observation, how much gap would he or she has, and so how much behind is the student compared to other students with similar characteristics, and that's what we label the underachievement. But we can also measure directly the effect of the policy, the real causal evidence of giving additional resources to the schools. In terms of data, we use data from the Flemish SIBO survey, which is a longitudinal questionnaire. So it follows about 1,400 pupils in 160 schools in the early 2000s. So we follow them 6 years over school, and we do have quite a bit of information on those schools. We do have, I'll skip this slide here, but we do have quite a bit of information on the IQ of students, on the gender, on the language at home, the income of the household, etc. So basically we have quite a bit of good information about what I defined before as inputs of a student, and the endowments of the students, the innate abilities of the students, such as the IQ test score at the end of kindergarten, for instance. Of every single student, we know the IQ at the end of kindergarten, so before they went to education, but also parental information, etc. In terms of outputs, we know the math test scores, such that we know at every year a student is taking in first, second, third until sixth grades in Flemish education system, what is the math test score. And as such, we can then measure the underachievement. It's the gap between the potential and the actual outcome of the student. And we can also make distinctions between persistent and transient underachievements, which is quite insightful for policymakers because it allows us to distinguish about, what are the reasons why we observe underachievement, and what are is it rather long-term underachievement or short-term underachievement. Long-term underachievement, for instance, because of textbooks that are used differently. Short-term is really like teacher characteristics that might result the whole class. So we can make the distinction, which we try to do in the paper. All right, I see that time is ticking, so I'm going to present you the main results of our paper. So first of all, our results are well aligned, the basic results are well aligned with the literature. And the literature is saying that additional resources spent to schools, it barely has an effect. And that's what we find here as well. If we just look around the discontinuity, so on the left-hand side of the cutoff and the right-hand side of the cutoff, we don't find any influence in this traditional regression discontinuity design. So there is no effect on achievements if we spend more money to the schools. So basically, the money is not that well spent. So the money doesn't result in additional test scores on math. We don't find it for girls, we don't find it for boys, we don't find it for high CES, low CES, whatever we do, it's always a very robust result. More money around the cutoff doesn't result in different outcomes. But interestingly, in the same regression, we could measure, as I showed you before, we could measure the impacts on achievements, the regression discontinuity design, but we could also distinguish the underachievement part. And that's the second part of the results. On underachievement, we do find the results. And we find that although overall, on the average students, in terms of better test scores, we don't find a result. We find a result on the underachievement in the sense that, if we provide better resources to the schools, then suddenly the gap between the potential achieving and the real achievement is going to shrink. And the students, they are, or the CES funding is trying to assess improving the potential of the students. And so the underachievement, that's a negative sign here, the underachievement of kids is decreasing thanks to the funding. And that's simply because if there was a little bit of additional funding, then suddenly you do have additional teachers in those schools, and those different teachers, they can just pick a few students out of the classes, and they can better tailor the course to a specific student, such that, again, we realize better the potential of the students here. In terms of policy implications, we find that this is of course interesting in the sense that we do find that overall we don't find an effect. But if you look at the PISA test scores, if you look at the TIMSS test scores, European Union countries are declining over time. And it's of course quite interesting to see what are the mechanisms. Is this time varying? Is this changing over time? And that's something that the paper can allow. So if in further research we would like to delve a bit deeper into those changes over time, such that we know better what's going on and that we can have a more nuanced understanding of the impact of policies, and not necessarily the full impact, the causal impact, but also the efficiency enhancing impact. Voilà, that's in a nutshell the paper. I'm curious, do we still have time, Takis? I'm not sure what the time is. Okay, maybe.
I think we have 5 minutes for questions and feedback.
Yes. Did it?
If I may ask a question, I actually posted a question in chat, but I think that is more relevant for higher education or high school, not for elementary school. But can you a bit clarify this concept? What kind of disadvantaged students we had? Was it lack of certain language skill? Was it social, let's say, position of family, or was it physical disadvantage? And also, if we think about effectiveness of studying and achievement, how happy they were with their social environment. Did you also measure this, how happy they are to continue in the school? Because that is also one reason why some students drop out from schools, that they are simply trying hard, but they don't succeed enough.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. Yes, indeed, so it would be interesting to apply this methodology to not only primary education, but also to higher education, because indeed we know that the socioeconomic status of students is more influenced at the beginning of the career, and there's a bigger impact there than later on. That's why we decided to focus first on primary education, because we can better accommodate and change it. So the spending is better spent as early as possible, and that's why we thought it was as relevant there. But indeed, it would be interesting to apply this to different education levels. In terms of the criteria, we know the criteria very well because it's used for funding, and so there is basically no bunching, no possibilities to cheat on the criteria. It's the education level of the mother. If the education level of the mother is maximum primary education, then a student is identified as disadvantaged. If you're living in disadvantaged neighborhoods, if they do have a scholarship to go to school, and if their home language is non-Dutch, so if they're not Dutch speaking at home, and it's a combination of the three, then it's a kind of weighted system to decide is a student then disadvantaged or not. But the nice thing is that we know this for all students, simply because it's registered, it's admin data, and we know it very precisely for all students who are the different disadvantaged characteristics of the students. Voilà, that's the second question. And the third question about other characteristics, it's a survey which is quite rich. So we do know quite a bit of the motivational factors indeed of students. We didn't explore them yet, but it would be very interesting indeed to have a look at ambition, for instance, of students, because we know from PISA that ambition is going down in many European countries. So that might be interesting to look at. It might also be interesting to look at the general well-being of students, because of course, it goes hand in hand with achievements. So that's a very valuable suggestion. Thanks a lot. Okay, so I suggest that we move on to the second presentation.
Good morning to everyone. I'm going to share the slides. Well, or maybe I can also Well, okay. Can you hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you also, Christoph, for your presentation and also for your general introduction, let's say, on efficiency analysis that can definitely help also to follow my presentation. I am Gaetano Francesco Coppetta. I am a postdoctoral researcher at Politecnico di Milano. This is a joint work with Tommaso Casisti from Politecnico Milano and Luigi Brighi at University of Modena Reggio Emilia. It's a paper about the efficiency of European public universities. We focus in this case on institutions, so not on students. And we also look at the role that different funding mechanism schemes can have on the performance of institutions. We'll start some motivation. We all know how much higher education institutions are important for our economies. They promote human capital, they foster innovation through knowledge creation. And of course, in terms of policy, from a policy perspective, became very important to be sure that these institutions receive the right amount of resources in order to improve the education and research outcomes, making sure to guarantee an effective, fair, and efficient use of public resources. So it is very important in this context to analyze the efficiency in these terms, and it's crucial as well to identify policy levers that can push universities towards better performance. This is a direction in which most of the literature already went. There is a growing body of literature that focus on the key determinants of better performance of institutions. And if we look at this literature, we can find several suggestions about managerial practice or environmental factors that help university to have better performance in terms of efficiency. But we also have a suggestion about the critical role that the founding systems plays in shaping the behavior of universities. From a theoretical point of view, if we think university as complex organization that respond to some sort of incentives that can be linked to the funding and adjust their action and their behavior in compliance in order to receive more funding, we can get some suggestion about the fact that the behavior can completely change based on the way the funding schemes are built. In this view, government, students, or stakeholders can affect institutional performance through the link that they create between incentive and the funding mechanisms. If we look at the way universities are funded in Europe nowadays, especially after a long season of reforms beginning in the late 90s, they are mainly funded through three channels. So first of all, the core budget, which is basically general government allocation, which is in most of countries still the most important part of fund that university receives. And they are mainly allocated according to some performance-based systems, usually related to funding formulas that can use output-oriented or input-oriented indicators, let's say. But there is very heterogeneity in the way that the funds are allocated at this stage. Fortunately, we do not have data at that level to see the differences between the countries. So we must focus on other two form of fundings that are related to tuition fees. In many countries, there are some sort of level of contribution about the students. The general idea is that they share the cost of education. This create, in a way, a link between the funding and the services with effect on efficiency. And the third channel is the third-party funding that involves competition to get more funds for external parties or private or public. For example, typically they are project-based funding, for example, or the Horizon project or the PRIN in Italy. When we look at literature that try to focus on the relation between efficiency and the different way to fund universities, we actually found very different results, not limited understanding, I'll say. Some studies find a positive correlation with competitive funding in general. Some others found some U-shaped effect or not impact at all. There is important paper by Boldi et al. That found that competitive funding boosts efficiency in terms of third-party funding, but reduce the performance of top university due administrative cost. So in this paper, we try to contribute to this literature by looking at two main research questions. So how different universities funding schemes affect the way that they perform in terms of efficiency, and if this is associated in a way to the differences between the countries, the differences in efficiency between the countries. We make use of a four-component stochastic frontier model, as previous paper, which is a parametric approach to measure efficiency. This particular specification allows us to distinguish between two inefficiency terms, a persistent inefficiency term that we can call a long-run inefficiency, or a short-term inefficiency term that we can also call transient inefficiency. It allows also us to account for individual heterogeneity and to include the classical error term. So we have these two terms in efficiency that sum up the overall inefficiency, which is the U here. Moreover, following this approach, Badunenko-Kumbhakar approach, we are able to study the determinants of inefficiency by specifying heteroscedasticity in the two inefficiency terms. So we must assume the distribution of inefficiency that we assume half normal distributed, which is quite common in this literature, and we are able to insert to choose some variables to explain the variance of the two inefficiency terms. And well, after the assumption about the distribution of inefficiency, we can get to the parameter estimation using a simulated maximum likelihood approach. This is the final specification. We also must assume a functional form. We assume a translog functional form. And we also use time trend in the specification. So about data, we use the European Tertiary Education Register dataset. We also collect data about publication using Shival by Scopus, and we observe university between the period from 2011 to 2019. So we have a model with two inputs and two outputs. We use number of students and the total staff as input, and the number of graduates and the number of publications as output. We have 10 countries, and we use the determinants of as determinant of efficiency the share of student fees and the share of third-party funding that university receive. And we also include the time trend. These are some descriptive statistics, basically to show you that there is a quite wide heterogeneity among different institutions in terms of students in publication and also in the way they are funded. Some results. These are the result of the university production function. We use an output distance function here, which allow us to have two inputs and two outputs, so more input and more output. And we present three models. This is basically to show you that the three models are quite stable across the specification, and the differences is mainly in the variables that we use as determinant of inefficiency. The coefficients well behave in terms of theoretical expectation. After the estimation of production technology, we get the estimates on efficiency score. So we observe basically that there is a quite high level of efficiency in the system in general. We observe 0.77 level of efficiency. So still there is a potential output expansion of 23%, and also there is a quite wide heterogeneity. So the scores range from 0.32 to 0.95. So there are very efficient institutions with very inefficient institutions. However, most of these inefficiency, let's say, come from the persistent long-run term. So the differences between institutions is basically structural and not transient in time. Here we can see the distribution of the overall inefficiency. We can see also that the most of institutions on the right, but there is a long tail on the left, meaning that there are some institutions that are quite inefficient. But probably the most interesting part is the decomposition by country. This is the transit efficiency by country, and from this box plot, it's quite clear that even if there is dispersion, there is differences within the countries. Between them, there are not very important difference if we look at the transit inefficiency term, so the term that change every year in response to management decisions. However, if we look at the persistent inefficiency, so structural differences between the countries, they are quite strong, and they basically explain most of the differences between them. This gives us an indication about the fact that the differences among institutions most of the differences between them are explained by structural factors that can likely be related to some sort of decision that can be made at country level and at the higher education level. If we look at the results about the determinant of efficiency, we used, as I said, the share of fees and share of third-party funding as determinant of inefficiency. And it's quite interesting that the level of share of fees and the level of share of third-party funding are negatively associated in a significant way with the inefficiency. So higher share of fees and higher share of third-party funding are associated with a higher level of efficiency in general. And this is in line with the literature that think that there is a competition effect between institutions and the way that they and the attempt to attract more students and more fund can have positive effect on the way that they produce. We also found a positive time trend in terms of efficiency. So there is an increased efficiency over time over the 10 years and no effect in terms of transient inefficiency. So to conclude, the results reveal that shows that there is a relatively high level of efficiency, even though there are significant differences among institutions and among countries. And the most part of efficiency came from structural reasons, basically. Moreover, higher share of tuition fees and higher share of third-party funding seems to be associated with better performance. And of course, this gives an indication in terms of policy that governments and stakeholders can play a very important role in shaping the environment and to give the right financial incentives to higher education institutions. So there are some references, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gaetano. Very interesting. Are there any further questions? Yeah, Kere?
I wanted to ask about this interpretation. I sometimes in trouble myself, like how to interpret that there is a low input, low output cases as universities, but they are highly efficient. They are kind of weak institutions as we perceive it because their outcomes are low, but because they have also very low input, they still are on the frontier. How do you perceive those kind of observations or universities? How do you treat them? Or I don't know, what is your policy advice regarding to this?
Well, basically, if the university has low input and has also as well low output, but they are on frontier in terms of efficiency, they're efficient. So it's true that can be a problem for some other reasons. If we look at, for example, at performance in general, if we look at outcome in general, it can be a problem from several perspectives. If we look at efficiency mainly, they look efficient. So, well, in terms of policy, I would say that I don't know. Tommaso is here. Maybe he can also have a. But I will say that it's okay. No.
Yes. Can I go? I have
yes,
my
please.
hand.
I saw your hand raised, Tommaso. Please go ahead.
So yes, I think it is a very interesting question. I agree with Gaetano. If you look at the problem with the pure technical efficiency vision, then these are, institutions that are efficient on a technical sense. Of course, here, if the objective of the policy is to try to develop all the universities, so where the objective in the long term is to develop the activities of the universities, then having universities that remain, say, small and specialized, and that are typically the case of these universities, could be a problem. But this would introduce the problem of modeling the general equilibrium, and I would say the general strategy that a higher education system is pursuing. So at this stage, the model is completely agnostic. It's considering, say, the each institution in itself, and then if you want to model a weight on different inputs and outputs to provide an incentive to the institutions to develop, then it's a complete different story. But I don't want to say that it's a story which is useless. Actually, in my view, it is a story which is super important. And but it requires a different modeling to try to see what is the expected level of outputs and inputs that a university should employ.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe your last question, Simona?
Yes, hello. Thank you,
Hello.
Gaetano, also for presentation. I was just, I don't remember exactly now by heart your time frame, but there is heterogeneities across countries. There is Germany and also Lithuania, if I'm not wrong. How do you know how much it can bother your results? Because they are definitely different institutions and probably also the path and how they built the education system has been different. I mean, if I think about Lithuania, it's not the same as in Germany, Austria. So I don't know if you also try to, okay, the number of observations is quite small. If you try to understand if there is like cluster some countries, they are a bit homogeneous, if you get the same results or not. So
yeah, I completely agree. Well, actually, this is one of the way that we are moving. Our idea basically is to try to find the right way to merge countries, let's say. Our idea is that it can be possible that these countries share the technology in a way, so they should be estimated well, because something that I'm not saying here that we are relying on a strong assumption, but this is common in this literature, that all institutions share the same technology here. So they are, at least they work in the same way. That probably is true. However, it's possible, as you are saying, that there are some countries' differences, and some of these differences are not necessarily related to the geographical definition of countries, so some of them can work in similar way. So we are trying to understand if there is which is the best way to merge this country and to estimate different technologies for subgroups of country and to see if there are different results between them. So we are trying to build now a latent class approach, but we are working on. So also, if you have suggestion on this, it will be more than welcome.
Okay, very much. Thank you very much, Gaetano. I guess the suggestions might follow in the next presentation by Chieri and Simona. So the colleagues from our sister project, Horizon, Twinning of Horizon project. Please, the floor is yours, Chieri. It's called Effective. I was looking for the name. Sorry, Effective.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm coming from the sister project, as Christoph said, and I hope you see my slides. So the sister project is dealing with the teacher pedagogical competences, meaning skills, knowledge, attitudes, and their cost efficiency of those practices. So instead of this, like, I don't know, individual or school level data, we have a experiment or, I don't know, training level data. But in this piece where Simona is the first author whom you just saw on the screen, we deal with school level data. So we are asking one country case, 2 periods, and our case is Estonia, as you might have guessed. Our second co-author is also somewhere around, being Lauri, so maybe she can help me out later on with answering questions. So let's see how it goes. But 15-minute quiz quickly. Typically, those presenters who say, "Oh, I will be super quick," always go over time. So I try to control myself. I still have 10 slides to go. So if we start from this, what kind of problem we solve, then we solve some sort of the environmental problem, to be honest, what we call school market problem. So even within one country, even though on average, as Christoph also presented, Estonia is performing super good based on at least many kind of characteristics like limited spending per student, while very high PISA scores. There is also other indicators which show that the schools are performing really, really well. Our insight is that this operational environment, which we call school market, differs by schools quite a lot, and the school market divides in Estonian case schools to like 3 clubs. There are those private schools, public elite schools, and public regular schools, and all those kind of school market hybrid types have some sort of the historical background why there are 3 markets in one country. And this is not a geographical divide, it's rather a kind of parental choice divide. And this historical debate or case specificity, in our case, becomes from this education political background. While parental choice reform has not ever officially taken place, this is highly practiced by richer end of the society, meaning that either by going to private schools or those elite public schools, which have a total freedom to use whatever admission practices they prefer. From the grade 1, for us, it's 7-year kids. So they can test them, they can interview them, everything goes if you have this elite status, and most of those schools we are dealing with are basic schools, meaning that the class is 1 to 9. Some of them schools are still K-12 schools, meaning that they still have 12 classes. And in those cases, most of those elite schools are K-12 schools. And in those cases, there is a accountability information public, meaning that the state graduation exams, external exams, results are published in the newspapers. Everybody knows them, so everybody knows which are the good schools. While in the case of K-9 schools, this information is hidden. So it's like a hot talk-based school choice. While at the same time, Estonia was long time learning or relying on this very Soviet education model, meaning that all special education need kids were kept in exclusive schools. So starting from 6-7 years back, we had those inclusive education reform, which make mandatory for most of the schools to accept all the students who live in their neighborhood, while those elite public schools don't have to follow it, private schools don't have to follow it. So it applies to the public regular schools. And the third tendency within this case, what is going on is this integration of the Estonian Russian schools. Unfortunately, our data don't cover the last year. This year we started or abolished basically Russian school. This is the influence of the Ukrainian war. But so far, students were going to the 2 kind of parallel systems, Estonian kids mostly Estonian schools, and Russian students mostly to Russian schools. They had the same curriculum, but the school language is totally different. And only some families opted for Estonian schools, which I don't know, wanted to integrate more or something like that. So how to account for this environmental difference is that schools are embedded into due to this hybrid market or the accountability information parents have regarding their choice and autonomy of schools accepting students or, I don't know, kind of designing the admission policies. We use efficiency analysis, and I guess you have seen those citations already today. And our method in this case is non-parametric, so we don't have this, what you saw in the previous presentation. So we do this 2-stage double bootstrap. the Zimmer and Wilson 2007 type of modeling. And we rely on multiple outputs, multiple inputs, and try to do this input minimization, what you saw also in Christoph's slide, where you found for a same level of output, kind of the optimal usage of inputs. And in this double bootstrap team, you have stage 1, stage 2, and then bias correction model. So we use this bias correction by doing this 1,000 bootstraps. So generally, this is, I guess, the most debatable part of the model identification for us, because what we struggle most is to get the inputs outputs so that the model is not biased by or has not. We know that it's very kind of reliant on the data, actually, what you use. So in our case, we have 3 inputs, 4 outputs. Most of them are pretty classical, but as you see from input side, we have only teacher characteristics, no material sources. And we decided to keep only those regular schools in our model. So all those schools who actually have choice or discretion over the parental income or what kind of students they accept, those schools are kicked out as outliers. So we model only part of our school market, and only those schools who don't have a autonomy over admission. So the inputs are only teachers, not students. Students are our environmental variables, and we have 4 very classical outputs. We have a math and Estonian scores of the final exams, and then we have proportion of students who continue studies after a lower secondary basic school, and then proportion of students who are not dropping out. So the positive outcomes only. And then our environmental variables whose covariates we wanting to estimate, or what we concentrate on, is those 3 things. We are able to get a first time in Estonian history schools matched with parental income. So we know each school's median parental income. We know the proportion of students with special education needs, so we just reverse it. So we use it as a non-sen proportion. And then we have this language issue. We know the proportion of students with school language same as home language. For example, it can be Estonian student, it can be Russian student in Estonian school, then it's it's not the same student, or it can be a Estonian student in a Russian school. So both are bad cases. So, or it can be Ukrainian student in Estonian school, then it's also lowers our proportion of students with the same school language and home language. So as I said already, with all the data at school level, so in all the system, we have more than 300 schools, but as I said, we have those outliers in the private schools, or some schools which are still using this non-inclusive practices. They are still exclusive SEN schools, or some schools which actually are able to select students. So those are kicked out as outliers, and we end up with around 280 as a number of observations. Don't remember by heart, it's coming soon. But if we want to know what is a school market in general looks like, then Estonian schools
just to interrupt you, Kate, but you do have like 5 minutes left.
Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, doing quick. Okay, generally the school market is very simple. We have small schools, old teachers, who are all highly qualified. And there is a large differences in student background. So all those 3 school markets are here. I just draw your attention to maybe this discrepancy between the math scores of the final 9th grade exams. So actually these elite public schools perform better than private schools, and public non-selective schools perform much lower in all exams. But as typical education production function says, there is a clear indication there is what PV rate association. We can see that, sorry, the graph is in Estonian. On the x-axis, there is a parental income, and on the y-axis, there are math results. So you can see the difference between the schools. All the lilac points are coming from capital city. So there is a huge discrepancy between schools. And efficiency scores by geography are here. So we can see the greener is the dot, the better the scores are. So there are only very few, very like kind of low efficiency schools. They are concentrated to the South Estonian part, but the geographical differences by financing, you can see that there are regional differences, like Russian part here, close to Russian border, is getting more financed here as well. The more remote you are, the more money schools have, while the efficiency scores are not correlated by that very much. But what we are mainly after, and you can see that I have 3 more slides. So we were mainly after this effects of how not-SEN, family income, and home language affect efficiency scores. And here you can see, but our great surprise, we didn't find any home language effect. So what we did find and hypothesized is that typical way, if you are a school where the families are richer, then your efficiency score goes up because you have more educational resources at home. And also we see that the smaller is your SEN student ratio, reverse saying that more regular students you have, the bigger is your efficiency. So I will not show these nonlinear effects, but we also try to do these nonlinearities. But I go to the conclusion. And so what we basically say is that inclusive education, at least based on this Estonian school level data, is not an efficiency question. So actually, at least short run, we see that schools are becoming less efficient if they have more special education needs students. But it's a moral question. And maybe in the long run, it also makes society better somehow. Parental income, or we can interpret it as educational resources at home effect, has expected. So what leads us to this policy perspective related to this current school market, or the debate over, like this classical debate over autonomy, accountability, and choice. And regarding to autonomy, our debate goes to this school's autonomy to select. We know from the literature that early tracking is harmful, both to efficiency and equity, actually. Yes, but we know also that because of the urban segregation, or also geographical area segregation, catchment area-based school allocation, meaning no autonomy to select students, can be even more harmful. So I guess this debate is very much open here. And the other debate is whether this accountability, that some schools are accountable and selective, while the other schools are not accountable and are not selective, is a good practice after all. And then very much relates with the first presentation of Padudenko et al., what Christoph did, related with financing of schools, is this question of existing support and non-existing support based on disadvantages. So the existing support is a financial support for special education needs, but still we see the outcome that those SEN students are kept in separate classrooms instead of integrating to the schools. And this non-existing SES support, meaning that, like, I don't know, there is any support school level, whether this is what we saw from this first presentation makes sense in our case. Thank you all. I'm done, and this is my small promotional for a sister project, a promotional webpage and logo. So if we do have time, please feel free to ask any questions.
Thanks, Kere. Any questions? Tommaso?
Thank you, Kerr, for your presentation. Actually, as you know, this topic is in line with the weather reflection we are conducting. There is also a chapter in your last book on what does it mean to try to measure efficiency when you compare different kind of schools. So if I understood correctly, what you're claiming here is when you compare the efficiency of operations of different schools, then the parental background as other student level features are relevant for making fair comparison between apple with apple, and and I totally agree. I think that there is a room in the next future to try to integrate, say, efficiency analysis with policy considerations about the differences you have in different conditions of students, and also is the same for the schools, meaning it could be the case that schools have also different resource levels, and can also be an influence in the efficiency. So um, of course, when you have schools with more resources, they are able to get better results, but at the same time it can also be that they can result more inefficient because they are using more resources to attract better off students, and then they are not able to use them more than proportionally. So try to open a little bit the black box of the operations of the schools is a promising line of research in my view. And if you have data on this respect, I think there is a room for making the sister projects even more closely related.
Thank you, Tommaso, for this encouragement. Yeah, we were suffering quite a lot regarding to this multiple school markets, or within one school market, if you have different types of schools which have really different environment where they operate. And this made our kind of exercise a bit more difficult than we would have expected, and still struggling, as you can see. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot. Also for this a combination here of the effective and effect approach. So you see that the call definitely had the words effect in it. So that's how I guess we came up with all of those names. The last presentation of today, of the scientific presentation, is by Anna. Please, Anna, the floor is yours.
Yes. Just a second. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear and see you. Okay. Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for this workshop, this seminar. I'm a postdoctoral researcher. I'm Anarita Di Piero from University of Calabria in the south of Italy. And I'm happy to be here discussing with you this research carried out with Professor Christophe De Witt. We explore the underlying signals of efficiency in European university through a combined efficiency and machine learning approach. In the actual scenario, we should notice that the activities of universities is no more a matter of only teaching, but also a matter of research and transmission. And this expanded paradigm positions universities at the forefront of societal advancement. The reliance of universities on government funding subjects them to constraints of state budget. This financial limitation is a significant challenge for universities, since they should maintain competitiveness in an increasingly demanding environment, and they should act in this increasingly demanding environment with fixed input while trying to increase their efficiency. This study addresses some gaps in understanding how some internal characteristics may act to contribute to efficiency scores and to its prediction by considering the multidimensionality of the problem. Of course, to work on that, we relied on main literature in the efficiency domain, both in parametric and non-parametric side. There are some interesting reviews of this extensive literature, from which it emerged, first of all, an enlarged scope of research, since as competition over the years is getting higher in the sector, we registered a shift from one country studies to comparative studies, so studies on more than one country. As a second major insight throughout the literature, it emerged that despite parametric and non-parametric efficiency approach both have advantages and disadvantages, the non-parametric DEA is the predominant methodological approach used. And there has been also a huge methodological effort of researchers, allowing on one hand for the inclusion of external factors that are neither inputs or output, but may act as conditioning the turning process of inputs into outputs, and for the inclusion of external variables that may affect the efficiency score. So basically using two-stage approaches. Some of these DEA modifications have been critiqued over the years, and also there is a challenge related to the out of sample prediction. Indeed, even if a model like DEA may fit well for a sample unit, it may do not fit well for unobserved units, so for out of sample units. And also there is a multidimensional issue that with all the two already said challenges may be faced through artificial intelligence and its sub-branch machine learning. So if on one hand we have a growing body of research using efficiency methods, and on the other we have artificial intelligence techniques used mainly to predict student performance and dropout, learning activities, or to support some organizational processes, the combination of the two is still scarce. Here we have in this table some of the recent contributions that have applied our intelligence technique in combination with efficiency analysis. And our contribution is our work wants to contribute to this trend, basically answering to this research question: which characteristics are the most influential in explaining the efficiency of European universities? To do so, we computed a methodological flow that starts by assessing the efficiency of a university using DEA, with some critical choices that have to be done by researchers before performing DEA. So the output, the orientation, and we choose the output orientation in line with the main literature in line, with the nature of the sector that mainly work with fixed inputs. Then we have the choice related to the return to scale, and we choose the variable return to scale due to the fact that it accommodates a non-proportional relationship between inputs and outputs. And then we choose to perform 5 different models with 5 different combinations of inputs and outputs. The final score will be the average of the 5 different DEA scores. This came, of course, at the cost of losing some specific insights, but we rather favor a more general view of efficiency. The DEA score, the final DEA score, then came into the second step of analysis, which is the machine learning phase, where we perform a feature selection process, which is a supervised machine learning technique. So basically, we have a target to be predicted. The target is the efficiency score. We have a large set of variables, and through the feature selection, we can obtain a reduced set of variables by removing those variables that are irrelevant and or redundant according to the task. And the task is predicting a numerical variable, so a numerical value, which is the efficiency. So we are under the regression task. In this sense, for the feature selection process, we also perform some choices, of course. Following these flow in the figure, we split the data set into training and test data set, and we work before on the training data set. We compute 10 different methods, 10 different models by combining 2 different evaluators, one in the field and one in the wrapper configuration, to 5 different algorithms. Most of them are work by emulating biological behavior. We have best first, genetic algorithm, multi-objective, particle swarm, and then colony. Then we rank the 10 reduced data set. We rank them on the basis of statistical tests, and the best ones have been evaluated over the test data set. And then we obtain the best prediction model on which we can also evaluate the importance of each selected feature in a target prediction. So we have the best prediction model with the best reduced data set. This methodological flow has been applied to a sample of 235 university over 2011-2019 in these countries. And for the first step, as I already said, we computed 5 different models with 5 different combination of input and output, mainly referring respectively to the staff and students and to graduates and publication outputs. Of course, we rely on the main literature in the field to choose these variables, this combination. So then for the second phase, we obtain the efficiency score by averaging the 5 different efficiency score obtained from the 5 different combination. This became the target. This became the target of the feature selection phase, and the features are 33 that and goes from the status and the age of university, the expenditures, the staff, some variables related to the women representation, the foreigners, the STEM orientation, and the international mobility, the number of programs, EU framework programs for research and innovation, and publication. All the variables have been drawn from ITER, except for a publication from Scopus. Looking at the results, so let's handle our results firstly in terms of DEA. So the first step from the DEA, we obtain it results that all countries improved except for Lithuania, that nevertheless there is a slight decrease for it, for Lithuania. And then Cyprus, Austria, and Sweden produced the most significant improvements over the years. Generally speaking, we have a trend towards greater efficiency. Despite a decline in efficiency between 2015 to 2017, the latter year of study exhibited an acceleration in this sense. The mean efficiency score over the years is 80%. So it means that we can increase the outputs by 20% while maintaining the input constant.
Anna, you have 5 minutes. Sorry to interrupt. Okay.
Thank you. From the second step, it emerged that the best model is the ant colony optimization under the wrapper configuration. We obtained quite a satisfactory results in terms of errors, and this model produce a reduced set of variables. So out of a large set of 33 variables, we obtain a set of 13 variables related to student fee funds, PhD intensity, and the international mobility mainly. From this graph, we can obtain also the impact. From this graph, we can understand the shock values, so the impact on model output, also on the efficiency with respect to the feature value. And of course, we can obtain these results on the basis of the main literature in this sense. Amongst the most important features in predicting the efficiency, we have the tuition fees. So higher tuition fees is associated with higher efficiency. And this can be explained by saying that tuition fees induce the sorting of the best talents to top universities that can select the best students and researchers in a feedback loop. I think Bolli et al., as also Gaetano said before. Then a higher concentration of PhD graduates around fields of education is associated with higher efficiency. More PhD graduates is associated with higher efficiency, and this is a matter of the creation of larger research units, larger networks, and the international publication that at the end, of course, increase the research efficiency. And as a further result, higher international mobility is associated with the higher efficiency. And this is a matter of the fact that this mobility, which is not like migration and tourism, can, of course, increase the efficiency of the universities by pushing some more, by giving more input. Of course, these results can be should be interpreted by being aware of endogeneity. The main cause is the correlation between the variables and the error term. We have a problem of reverse causality, potential problem of omitted variable bias, since we don't have so many variables on the third mission and the organizational and administrative structure. And the interpretation should be what lies behind the efficiency of universities rather than what causes the efficiency. So efficiency literally associated outcomes with causality, but rather than correlation. In this case, we do follow the correlation direction. Of course, it is out of the scope of this research to build theories, but rather our intention was to provide new support to the extant literature through this new combination of techniques. And from this research, it emerged, to summarize, that there is a large room to improve efficiency in European universities. There are some variables that matter more than others in predicting the efficiency, and these are student fee funding, PhD program intensity, and international mobility. As implication for researchers, we suggest to combine efficiency analysis with artificial intelligence techniques and feature selection that performs accurately in this case. And based on our limitation, we suggest the researchers to work with a larger sample and variables that more in the third mission, which of course should be in line with data availability, and with the global importance of, with local importance of features, since in our case we look at the global importance. On the policymaker side, we suggest to enhance PhD programs by supporting the creation of strong research units, and by increasing PhD research funding, adjusting it with the cost of living in different countries. And we suggest to promote international student mobility, also by looking at the financial limitation of families when we look at Erasmus Plus programs and exchange programs more in general. From the university administrator side, we suggest to closely monitor and evaluate internal processes, and also to foster a culture of continuous improvement, relying on feedback from all the staff. So these efforts ultimately not only enhance the performance of individual institutions, but also can boost a more equitable and effective system, higher education system across all Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Very interesting. There are a few questions in the chats. Yes. I see questions by Tim and Mika. So the question on Tim is, so did you use Python to estimate this? That's the first question.
We use Weka and Python at the end for the sharp values. But
okay. The second question was by Mika. Yeah. So the efficiency score is 0.80 on average. this is a bit low if you're working in higher education. So this means that there is potential for 20% increase, as you said. And also Tommaso Agostini worked on that topic. Does he obtain similar findings? So the low inefficiency, if you can reflect on that.
Yeah. This is in line with the main literature. There is a large room for improvement. Of course, there are some countries that perform more better than others, but I mean overall the efficiency gap is of 20%. So we should work more on in order to fulfill this gap.
Yeah, and I guess so. So Tim also said so. It depends on the selection of input and outputs. So that's probably.
Yeah.
Maybe Tommaso, you want to step in?
I want to reassure Mika, that 0.8 seems quite low, and actually, depending on policymaking in different fields, can also be quite high. It depends a lot on the eyes through which you look at the problem. 0.8 means that there is at system level at 0.2, so meaning 20% possibility of increasing efficiency. And actually is not a big margin, is something that of course can be constantly improved, but given the differences and heterogeneity within the system, is not so surprising that you have institutions that are performing quite low. I think the dynamic is more important than the level. What is worrying me more from a policy viewpoint is that overall the efficiency levels tend to be quite stagnant, and I think it is the most important problem more than the level of efficiency, because if we are able to modify this in the medium run, we are able to improve the efficiency of the overall system, but still we are struggling on it.
Thanks a lot. I guess we can move on now after those academic presentations to our fifth presenter. It's Nuria Diaz-Gardia from the European Commission. So welcome, Nuria, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, colleagues. So I didn't prepare any slides because I thought it was going to be more like a discussion. Yeah, you can also ask me things at the end. So I try not to keep it too long, but you can then ask me more questions at the end. So thank you very much for inviting me. And I think it's great to have seen results from two projects, from EFFECT and Effective. I think it cannot be better. It's really wonderful that you're having this collaboration, and it's very good to see. I wanted to say something to start about the vocabulary. And that's not to underestimate that you're all using different words and a different vocabulary. So it might be less apparent for you because you are kind of sharing a vocabulary of economics of education. But I think even between countries, between education systems, between jurisdictions, because education policy is a national competence, and also between disciplines, we shouldn't underestimate it. And I wanted to take the example of low achievers and underachievers that in the first paper that you presented, Christophe. In fact, we have at the EU level, we have EU level targets. And one of the targets is on basic skills. And in fact, we call it a target on underachievement in basic skills. But in fact, what we're measuring is low achievers, because we use the PISA figures to measure this target. So we're saying underachievement or low achievement. In fact, we're even talking about different things. But what it means is that it's very good to spend time talking together and taking the time to see where each one is coming from. I think there can be a lot of value about that. I also said that a few words about the context. Because I said it's a national competence, but there is a new role. So there's a new competence to contribute to the development of quality education. And there we're looking for the EU value added. And one is quite political. And the last paper you talked about mobility. And in fact, this is something where we can really see a new value added with the Erasmus Plus program. And it's also part of the priorities of the next Commission. So there will be emphasis on Erasmus Plus. We know there that there are some that we need to know more about how equitable is Erasmus Plus, is the support sufficient, all these things. But anyway, this is something that is going to be clearly in the future quite important. And then what also remains, what I think it's common to most countries, is the need to conduct evaluations, which is what you are doing, but to conduct evaluations in education and to pay attention to effectiveness and efficiency, because this concerns all the countries and also the Commission, because we also administer large funding programs. So it's also a message to ourselves. So we are now at the time of transition in the Commission, because we had these elections in June to the European Parliament, and there's been a process to have a new Commission in place, and that is going to start very soon on the 1st of December. But in this period of transitions, we've basically all been looking at some reports that are public, so you probably also heard about them, this letter report that mentioned a lot about mobility and about this fifth freedom. And these reports, we consider they're basically informing our policies for the future. So there's also the Draghi report about competitiveness, but that mentioned the PISA outcomes, and we are trying to basically use this also as improving learning outcomes of kids, of pupils, of students. This is important for competitiveness. So that's also how we argue it. And there was also a report by Heitor, the former Minister of Research from Portugal, about the future of Horizon Europe, in fact, the next program and what to do. So that can be quite interesting for you to know. I can put them in the links in the chat afterwards. So if you don't know them, you can have a look at them, because there's a lot about social sciences and humanities, about the recommendations for the future programs. So for the new Commission, we know that the education is quite prominently placed. So we are quite pleased about it, because there is a new, it's called Executive Vice President. Well, it doesn't matter too much for you, but it means it's a relatively high level in the Commission, and it's the Commissioner will be responsible for education and skills. And there's already in the mandate for new Union of Skills, there's a mention to focusing on investment. So on investment on adult and lifelong learning. So with a lifelong learning perspective, VET, everything. So I think this is a signal that we're keeping this investment and efficiency and effectiveness of investment quite at the core. There are also other things that have been mentioned, like STEM, for example, basic skills is quite important, a new agenda for teachers, and also mental health of children and young people. So these are things that, it's not a surprise, but it's going to be part of the agenda of the next Commission. And I wanted to also say a little bit about the funding of Horizon, not just because it's a project, that the projects are receiving this support, but also because you mentioned it even in the papers on higher education, that research funding, it's one of the variables you've looked at, and that one of even there were conclusions or recommendations about that. So there, basically, there's been quite an emphasis, and the fact that there are already 2 projects here shows it, and there are other projects out there. So there's another sister project and some cousins that working on longitudinal data and looking also on transitions between education and VET, education and labor market. So there is quite a portfolio of projects that is growing, looking a little bit at these issues of efficiency, effectiveness. And it's not a new topic for the Commission. It's been quite present, also coming from the side of the public finances, the quality of public finances. So this is something that the Commission has been working more from the finance department side for many years. But the idea was to bring it to the education, to the remit of education, to have these debates from education, not just as a debate on public expenditure in general, but to bring it to the remit of education policies. And for this, it's very clear that the Commission needs expertise, research expertise. So that's why there's been initiatives like a Commission expert group, and several of you have been part of that expert group, but also these calls. And anyway, so that to put that into the context, also to say that when we discuss these work programs of Horizon with these programs they don't come from the Commission. They are created and discussed very closely with the member states, the countries, and those who are also associated to Horizon. So not only the EU member states, but all the other countries that are not in the EU, but they're associated to the program. And I have to say, there is always a lot of support for topics on education and a clear understanding. Several are very vocal to say we really need more research. So I think that we are happy to count also on the support from the countries. Then I wanted to say a couple very quickly. Well, maybe I leave it for about the learning lab. I can say it in the end if you want. Then you ask me and I say something about the learning lab, because I wanted to make sure to tell you a couple of other things that we do at EU level that are perhaps less known, which is in fact this, you mentioned ETER and you mentioned Eurydice. We also have a support for countries to participate to big surveys like ICCS or ICELS, and also to the TALIS of the OECD. And And then the role of, you were saying sometimes, the role of parental education, the fact that we have at EU level a task to also monitor what happens across all countries, it limits also a little bit the data and the statistics we can use. So we rely a lot on Eurostat and on descriptive statistics. But I think it's also quite important for you to have that in mind. And then on the, I also wanted to say, because I was wondering, what does the Commission expect from researchers, no? Because this is something that we don't often have these discussions together, and I think there should be probably more. But that's something that also was inspired by the discussion that the papers you've presented. Basically, we expect researchers, to continue what you're doing, okay? So to strengthen this evidence base, but also about the causal impact. That is really something that we lack very much, and that has to be done by researchers. This causal impact is something really we need much more of it. And then in the second paper, Gaetano, you finish by saying something that there is a role in shaping the environment and giving the right incentives. And I was like, okay, we could basically start a meeting from that and discuss this. Okay, what is the role and what are the incentives, and how to basically have more of a dialogue between the findings of your paper, but how to take them forward. Because I think we have to meet somewhere between policymakers and researchers, and where to meet is not so, it's not just by having papers and hearing them. Sometimes actually we need a bit more discussion. That's at least what I feel. So something that is I think missing is also how to, not only policymakers, but also practitioners like teachers or school leaders, how to learn from the research, and so that everybody can bring it to our own context and use it to do better our work. So that is something that I think I wanted to make sure I mentioned. And I also had a question for you, because I wanted to know, what do you expect, in fact, from policymakers, and how is it for you to work in an interdisciplinary way? That I would like to know. And then if there is time, I'd be very happy to tell more about the Learning Lab. You tell me. Yeah.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Nuria. So very insightful comments and suggestions. So I'm also happy to learn that we can continue so as researchers on and trying to focus on causal evidence. But also indeed, so I fully agree. So it's important to connect not only to the Commission, but also to teachers, to school directors, etc. So that's in fact what we try to do with Effect. So if you look at our Effects homepage, you will see that we try to connect to different stakeholders, of course, in different events. So I don't think there are a lot of teachers here today. It's really targeted events. So we did a study day, for instance, a couple of weeks ago on teacher shortages. And then we deliberately focused the full day or the afternoon on teacher shortages in a local setting, showing the effect results. And so you have to deal with them at different levels. But that's exactly what we try to do in the Effect projects. And I guess in terms of multidisciplinarity, so it's of course a pleasure to work in consortia like that. I think I speak for all of the Effect partners, but it's really nice to do, because those kind of projects, they give us a lot of freedom, and at the same time they allow us to do some really policy relevant research. And I guess that's in turn what we expect from the Commission and from other stakeholders. It's helping us to define the research agenda such that we can do the research, but that's also relevant research. So all of us are empirical researchers trying to focus on new data, collecting new data, new experimental designs, etc. But all of us, we would like to publish them in the best journals possible, but at the same time also have policy impact. And I guess that's really, at least speaking for myself, what I would expect from the Commission, from different stakeholders, what we also asked last week on the study day, for instance, for teachers and school directors. So please help us with defining the agenda, and then if we see something in that, if we see data on that, if we see opportunities, we will continue indeed and do what is expected from us from the academic side. So that's a little bit the answers to your call, and so thanks a lot for that. But maybe indeed, I think that the Learning Lab, if you can devote 2 more minutes, because we do have just a couple of minutes left in the meeting. But
Yeah,
if you would just show us a little bit what is a learning lab and what is in there for us academics and slash policymakers here in that.
Yeah, so I didn't want to take too long, but basically the Learning Lab is quite a big endeavor. So it's something that has been, because the aim is about what we call this evaluation culture in education. So it's to nurture this evaluation culture in education, because education can be a topic where everybody who has been in school has an opinion, and this is the case among policymakers and also within the Commission and outside. So there is a lot of that. So I think to have this real evaluation culture in education policy across the EU, but also in the Commission, this is a main aim. So it's basically to contribute to. You were saying in the beginning, Christoph, that we have a lot about perhaps efficiency and effectiveness in education, but not so much about cost effectiveness. Also, a lot of studies from the US or perhaps the UK, and much less in the European context. So this gap, not void, but this big gap, is also something that the aim of the Learning Lab is to contribute to filling this gap slowly, because it's but surely, and also with this growing the evidence, having more somehow help a bit the policymakers to tailor the interventions to the context, because that's something that always we find extremely difficult. We heard from a paper on Flemish schools, another in Estonia. We can see how different the context is. So how can we learn from what you will learn from this context to how can we operate that in another context, like what makes sense and what doesn't make sense? That's something that is also very much at the heart. And it's basically to support, so it's all voluntary. So the idea is to support policymakers, and there are different activities. And there is a lot of emphasis on counterfactual evaluations. So that is why I also said about research to have an impact, to really measure the impact of intervention. That is also very much at the heart of the Learning Lab, to use counterfactual evaluation methods. And many can participate, policymakers can participate at national, but also regional or municipal level. If in some countries the competence on education is at the municipal level, it should be then open to policymakers of all the levels, but also to practitioners, members of the civil society. So there is a community of practice, and that meets about twice a year to gather and basically have this community and discuss things together, and try to nurture this space also for exchanges. There are also calls. So we ask country member states to say, well, I would like to carry out a counterfactual evaluation with the support of the Learning Lab. And then there is a discussion that takes place depending on the topic, depending on the data that are available, the data collection that the country has in place. If you can find a method that with the data, and you have a method that you can basically study what is required, then it can be done. And there is something starting in Lithuania, and perhaps something also in Portugal. So this is a bit starting to take place. And there are also specific trainings that are given more for policymakers. So there was one in, I think in Latvia, and another in Malta. So that basically it's on demand, because it's countries who have to say, we need this, we would like to have that. Then they get close to us, and then we cooperate a lot with the Joint Research Center of the European Commission to do this. But I think there is also the calls, these calls in Horizon. We also consider that they're feeding to the Learning Lab, and there is the idea to gather perhaps the projects together and have a discussion. So we are reflecting about that, but you will hear about it once our plans are a little bit more determined. We also bring together analytical contributions like books So it's a bit of a hybrid, I would say. I think it's fair to say.
Thanks, Julia. In the chat, there are a few questions on the website of the Learning Lab.
So yes, I can put it in the I'll add
chat
it
as well.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure whether there are any further urgent questions for the seminar. No, otherwise stay tuned on our social media, and we will connect to you soon for a third online seminar on a different topic of the EFFECT project. But I just wait for a couple of more minutes. Is there any further question or suggestion? No? Okay, so thank you very much, and see you later on. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.